Heyo everybody, Haku here with my review for Boku no Hero Academia Season 4 Episode 2. So since I'm so far behind on this one, I've actually already watched Episode 3 and my review of that will be coming not too long hopefully after this one, maybe just a day or two at most. But yeah, this one, I think the first half of it was like really good. It was introduction stuff, but it was really good introduction stuff. And the back half of it to me was more like very introductory, like basic stuff, where it's like we're gonna be getting a lot more, as we saw in the next episode, of Mirio and Night-Eye and Izuku, and All Might as well. But we just kind of first started scratching the surface with this episode. But yeah, this is our first kind of real episode. I loved episode 1, even though it was sort of anime only, recap kind of stuff, but I really enjoyed it personally. So yeah, in this first half that was really good, R.I.P. Magne. We see sort of one of our first, at least like important named character kind of deaths, and I actually really liked Magne. Now here's the thing: I see so many people, like, because I watched so many other people's videos on Boku no Hero Academia and everything, so many people just like, oh well, Magne wasn't that important and they just died. I remember upon me first reading what happened, because again, in my reviews I will do no manga spoilers or anything, but I have read the manga, so I remember when I first read it in the manga, I was like, oh no, Magne, I don't want Magne to die. So yeah, I actually really was saddened by Magne's death. One thing I will say though, because I saw once Stain was brought up by Chisaki as one of the pieces that Shigaraki had wasted. Stain, a lot of people I saw were asking, like, whatever happened with him? I hope we see him again. We don't really know what went down after he was sort of like had his rib stabbed into his lung or whatever, way back in Hosu. But this is something that I think I even brought up last season, and it's not a spoiler for me to say it, so don't worry. But last season, after the fight between All Might and One for All, there was a lot of really small well, not really even really small things, they were sort of somewhat important, but a lot of things that the anime, just for whatever reason, was like, we're just going to leave out. Like, say, All Might actually announcing his retirement, or the Pussycats finding out about Ragdoll's quirk being gone. There's just these things that, for whatever reason, they just left out. And one of those things that I thought was kind of important, and I thought was very strange, which is why I believe I brought it up last season that they left out, is when One for All is doing his little internal monologue talking about his "Your Next" speech for Shigaraki. During that time when he's being carted through the halls of Tartarus, we see Stain locked up in Tartarus there. And that was completely left out of the anime for whatever reason. And another thing that was left out is when Izuku, after the exam, sends a picture of his license or whatever to All Might, and it was right after All Might had got done talking to to All for One, and we see this scene that was all in last season, but before he receives the message, he talks a little bit with Tsukauchi when they're in the car there in the manga, and Tsukauchi was talking to Stain while All Might was talking to All for One. So again, that was just something that had to do with Stain that for some reason the anime just left out last season. Like I said, there were a lot of things like that the anime just left out for whatever reason. Another thing I like about this whole opening half is the development we start to see with the League of Villains. Because we haven't got a ton of development for them personally as characters, but we're starting to see little seeds of that being planted here, especially in the beginning here. The back half of this, just seeing Amajiki and Mirio makes me so happy to see much more of them. And like I said at the beginning of the video, the stuff with All Might, Izuku, Night-Eye, and Mirio, all that stuff is just sort of getting started, and we're going to see a lot more like we saw in episode 3, which is already out by this time. Some of the comedy, I will say, felt a little bit awkward for me, and not just the Mirio stuff, like where he's like purposefully kind of awkward, but he still smiles through it and everything. Not like that. I mean like some of the stuff with, say, Izuku or the teachers. Some of that stuff I definitely wouldn't say it was bad, it just felt a little bit awkward for me. And to compare, because I watched this episode in both the sub and the dub, just to compare it like I did last week, I think that Chisaki's voice isn't bad in the dub by any means, but one place where the sub really excelled in my opinion this week is Chisaki's voice is just so good in the sub. It's like it's really really great in the original voices. The dub isn't bad by any means, but man, Chisaki's voice is just so good. Now on the other side of things, I think that Night Eye's voice in the dub is really amazing. I really really like Night Eye's voice in the dub. His voice in the original again is really really good. So there's no complaint with his original Japanese voice, but Night Eye's voice in the dub I think is really good. And just like what I said last week, I think the dub had really great translations again. Like, there were a lot of lines that came through in the dub where I was like, you know, it's kind of odd that they didn't use that translation for the subtitles, because that's a really accurate and really sort of easy to understand way to say things. So I'm like, the dub made this line really accurate and easy to understand, whereas in the sub, there were a few lines where I was like, okay, that's a little bit wordy and a little bit difficult to follow as I'm going through the episode. The only sort of, again, converse opposite of that is the line in the subs where Chisaki says a goal without a plan is a delusion. I just thought that was such a great line, and I was a little bit disappointed that they didn't use that line basically word for word in the dub, because I mean, it doesn't have anything to do with matching up their mouths because Chisaki's wearing a freaking plague mask, but still, I really liked that line. That's the only opposite, but I think generally the dub had a very good translation again this week. But to go through part for a few of the scenes here. Starting from the beginning, we see Gran Torino telling Izuku he can't take him on because he's working on something, and that's him recommending Izuku to go to Night Eye or whatever. Now, it's really cool that Gran Torino says he's working on something. We don't get to know what it is or anything, but we see that he's working with Tsukauchi, so it's cool. Gran Torino's not just sitting in his little house in retirement or anything. He's actively working on something with Tsukauchi, probably related to the stuff we saw in Season 3, when they were talking with All Might and stuff, so that's really cool. We see Chisaki, we learn a little bit more about his character, or Overhaul, and sort of the way he acts and speaks, and how he's kind of a germ freak a little bit here. His theme, his OST, it is so good. It is so good. But we learn a little bit more about how organized crime and the Yakuza are sort of something that worked before quirks and everything, but once superheroes and villains started coming around, organized crime kind of struggled in the age of heroes and villains. But Chisaki has a plan. He has a plan now that All For One is gone, to be ruler of the underworld and all that, but nobody is willing to bet on some Yakuza, so he needs funds, and to get the funds he needs the publicity that the League of Villains can offer him. So he offers for them to serve under him rather than the other way around. Now, Magne specifically, they all don't like it, but Magne specifically takes exception to it, because Magne's whole thing is not wanting to be bound by anything. So, I actually think it's really cool. It's just a very small thing that we really didn't get much time spent developing or anything, but it's interesting given Magne's place as a trans woman and how it relates into her quirk and everything too, where Magne can sort of magnetize people even at a distance. We saw her do it with Overhaul here. And they can magnetize people at a distance, and whether they're a North or South Pole depends on gender, or I don't know, I guess gender or sex, either way I guess gender works, but Magne can't use it on themselves, which is interesting. They can't magnetize themselves, which again probably plays into sort of them being a trans woman. So it's really really interesting, some of the detail just in this sort of I mean, I guess small character that got killed off so early on. But yeah, I like that, and their whole reasoning, and you would think it kind of fits with how Twice was when we learned a bit about Twice's backstory last time, where Twice is like, I'm crazy, there's no hero willing to save somebody like me, so I have to join in with other people who are like me. And the same with Magne, with their quirk, it kind of leads you to think, okay, they probably have to sort of they probably don't get the same opportunities to fit into the same sort of social norms as a lot of the other people do because of things outside of their control. Even their quirk. Say with Toga, Toga's quirk requires her to drink blood, so you figure that would probably be pretty frowned upon too. And so a lot of people, I mean, Shigaraki touching people makes them decay. Just looking at the League of Villains quirks, you can kind of see for a lot of them, oh yeah, I can kind of see how they've ended up in the places they've ended up. So Magne doesn't want to be bound or burdened by anything, and she gets overhauled. Just straight up, the top half of their body is completely blown up. Uh, Man, and Compress actually was really cool here, because Compress, if their quirk hadn't been stopped, they would have actually successfully compressed Chisaki. They were able to touch Overhaul's arm. But of course, they couldn't compress him because their quirk stopped working, and then they get an arm blown off. Yeah, also interesting to note, Chisaki starts breaking out in hives when he's touched. Maybe it has something to do with, again, and I'm just speculating because I try to go into these reviews as if I haven't read the manga, and also it's been a little while, so I don't totally remember in the manga. So I'm speculating that either it's actually literally physical, if people touch him he legit breaks out in hives, but then again Compress was wearing a glove, I think, so maybe it's that, or maybe it's just like a psychosomatic sort of thing where it's like born of him like fearing germs and people touching him, and that's what makes him break out in hives rather than it actually being a strictly physical allergy type thing. But Shigaraki runs in as well. The bullet, I guess I'm going to call it, it's kind of more like a dart, but the bullet, the same kind of one that hit Compress, misses Shigaraki, so this scrub has to jump in, take the hit for Overhaul, gets decayed, and then, of course, after this, cool speech and everything, Overhaul saying, you know what, call us when you calm down, we're body for body, but we'll owe you an arm. Just being a complete jerk. But Shigaraki stops twice in Toga, even though they both say that they want to go after them. They kind of want revenge. But even though he stops them, Shigaraki is thinking to himself, you're going to pay for this. He's still thinking about his own revenge, kinda, sorta. So, again, I like these little seeds of character growth being planted in the League of Villain characters here. Also interesting by their absence, Dabi and Spinner weren't there. I can't remember if there's anybody else in the League of Villains right now that wasn't there. I think it's just those two, but I kind of noticed after watching once or twice, I was like, wait a sec, yeah, Dabi and Spinner aren't there, like, at all. So yeah, that was just the first half here, and really there's, I think, a lot more to talk about in the first half than the second half. There's a lot of really cool things that happen there, and in the second half, like I said, it was just the basic introductions of introductions for the sort of relationships we're going to be getting between Izuku and Mirio and All Might and Night Eye. But yeah, going into the second half of this, I like the detail of finding out that some of the teachers were like, yeah, you know what, I think it's cool for the first years to go and start doing work studies. But on the other side of things, we have, and I'll talk a bit more in depth about work studies in the review of next episode, because they get into it more in depth next episode. So I'll do it in my next review. But I like the idea that some teachers supported it, like, yeah, let's let the first years do it, but the majority of them said, you know, they're kind of too young, too inexperienced, we don't want this to happen, and that All Might was actually one of the votes against having the work studies for first years. We get to see some of the other teachers' opinions, like Midnight saying, well, I mean, can't the school just support students if they want to do it? Or 13 agreeing with All Might. And same things later on with other points of All Might not wanting to introduce Izuku to Night Eye, with like sort of, what was it, Cementos agreeing with All Might that Izuku's shoot style just needed more time, it wasn't quite ready, where Ectoplasm, who had been training with Izuku, we saw in the TDL place, when they were learning their special moves and stuff, said, I think Izuku's made pretty good progress. I think he's pretty okay with it. So I like that we're seeing these different teachers having different opinions on the students. specifically the main character Izuku here. Um, so we get a bit more then of Mirio. And one thing I found interesting, because he was walking down the hallways hanging out with the other two members of the Big Three, which kind of makes you think, how close of friends are they really? Are they just classmates? Or how deep is their friendship just from seeing them walking together instead of Mirio off doing his own thing? But Hado calls him Togata-san, and Tamaki just calls him Mirio, so it kind of sort of alludes to Tamaki being a bit closer to him personally, or maybe Hado just uses formal names for people in general. Maybe. I don't know. I can't remember if she did that last season or not, now that I'm thinking about it. But Mirio talks about having been with Night Eye for a year now. And that sort of brings us into what work studies is. I won't go too deep into it because, like I said, I'll save most for next time. But work studies are basically like a legitimate internship where he's not quite recognized as a full-fledged pro or as a sidekick, but he's recognized as part of the hero offices. He works there as a hero. He's just sort of lower on the totem pole, so to speak, even though he's not Eye's favorite. I mean, generally a work study would be somebody that's there, but lower on the totem pole. So he's been working for/with Night Eye for a year now. And another thing I love here, Izuku talking about his dream, he starts off thinking, when he's like, what kind of hero, or Mirio's like, what kind of hero do you want to be? Izuku's like, saying the same thing that he's always said since he was a kid. Oh, I want to save everyone with a smile no matter what. And he cuts himself off in the middle of saying it because he realizes, saying it out loud, that's kind of a childish dream, and I've grown a bit since then. I've learned a bit since then. And he thinks about his mom being worried about him and says, I want to be strong enough that people don't worry about me. He thinks about Bakugo saying that he wants to always win. And he thinks about Koda saying and says that he always wants to save everyone. So when saying it out loud, as he later thinks to himself, he realizes that his original dream was sort of just childish thing that he'd been repeating to himself again and again since he was a kid. But now that he's had these experiences, his dream has become more nuanced and realistic, and he's realized a bit how much more difficult it is what he wants. We get some more information on Mirio being sort of a recommendation to possibly be the one to succeed in One for All. So it's interesting to note that Mirio, we learned this a bit last season, but Mirio's grades aren't particularly great or anything. But what makes Mirio special and what sets him apart, despite his grades not being that great, is that he's always smiling, and we see this. He's constantly making these jokes and then apologizing and saying, oh no, sorry, that wasn't very funny, now was it? But in him doing that, it sort of relieves the tension in the room, like what he did with Izuku and All Might when he was first there saying, you are here, just kidding, sorry, I'm nervous and all that. He sort of lowers the tension. He's always smiling, he's always bringing up the people around him spirits a bit. So though he isn't the best from a strictly hero standpoint, he has this sort of charisma that gives people a sense of peace, and that works so well with being somebody that could have been the successor to All Might, given that when it comes to just strictly saving people and defeating villains, Endeavor defeats more villains and saves more people. Endeavor's got the numbers and statistics on his side, but what All Might has over Endeavor is that All Might gives people a sense of peace and a sense of hope. He's a symbol for people. He has that charisma. So I think it's interesting to see how Mirio sort of has that same quality as All Might. Later on, as Izuku is going to meet Night Eye for the first time, we have Kirishima and Tokiyami telling Kaminari that they're going to be busy that day. Now, I thought this was going to be in reference to the two of them already having taken work studies, but it seems like in episode 3 they added in a scene with them just now getting introduced, so I guess this wasn't hinting at what I thought it was hinting at first. Or maybe it was, and they were just like, we need an extra scene in episode 3, so let's add this in anyway. We see that Bakugo and Todoroki have weekend classes now. I like that continuity and setup and all that, where they're the two that failed. They don't have their licenses like everyone else, so they can't do work studies since they're not licensed as a hero, even provisionally. So they have to take their extra courses on the weekends, which is cool. And then we just have simple, Izuku needs to make Night Eye laugh and all. They meet each other for the first time. And I love the staircase shot. They really went all out on the animation for a lot of this. Not even just the animation itself, but just the sort of direction and their artistic quality. I think they went all out on. Another thing, Bubble Girl is very interesting. We saw her a bit at the end of last season, I think. But the interesting thing with Bubble Girl, that if you've watched other videos and stuff, I'm probably sure you've heard a million times by now. But her design was actually a fan contest to have a character put in the series, and Bubble Girl won. So her design is like an actual legit full-on character in the series that somebody else designed. So that's really, really cool. But yeah, we see her as a sidekick. There's a bit more I can get into with that next review, but I'll leave this one here. I loved the episode. I'd give it 8 young heads out of 10, just because Chisaki's the young head of the Shie Hasaikai. But yeah, I'd give it 8 out of 10 because I thought the first half of it so interesting, sets up so many cool things. We see just working with all these different characters and their connections and all that. The first half is just really, really, really good. It's exciting. It's out of nowhere, seemingly. I like it a lot. In the second half, I still liked a lot, but it was just a bit more very, very introductory. So again, 8 out of 10 is a very good score, but yeah, that's what I'm thinking right now. So I really enjoyed it, and I hope you did too. If you did like the video, and comment down there too. Tell me what you thought of this week's Tell me what you thought of this week's episode, or I guess it isn't even this week's. What you thought of episode 2 and what you thought of my thoughts and review and all that. Subscribe for more Boku no Hero Academia, both anime and manga on the channel. I try to be as spoiler-free as possible, of course, in the thumbnails and titles and stuff for the manga videos and all that. But yeah, I really hope you enjoyed and all that. I said like, comment, subscribe, follow on Twitter if you want. I can try to keep you updated there and stuff for the channel or talk to you there. If you'd like a link to our Discord server to talk to me or more of us on Discord, just ask and I can give you a link. And if you want to help out, support the channel on Patreon, patrons get to select a series to cover on the channel. And currently, the selected series is Assassination Classroom, so whenever I finish that, or whenever I start up a new series on the channel, I will say, hey, I'm going to start a new series on the channel, give me some suggestions. Patrons will throw in the suggestions, I'll put all those suggestions in a poll, and then whatever wins the poll, that'll be what I decide to start covering on the channel next. So that's a little extra something other than just knowing that you're going to help me continue to make videos. But yeah, that is it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.